immediate and complete reports of local blood and guts.
What happened was true. The most bizarre and brutal series of crimes
The Barbie Killers refers to Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka, a notorious Canadian couple responsible for a series of heinous crimes in the 1990s. Together, they sexually assaulted and murdered several young women and girls, including Homolka's own sister, Tammy, and a 15-year-old girl named Kristen French, and others, including one victim who would almost become the very first one of a snuff film. The media dubbed them the Barbie Killers, or the Ken and Barbie Killers, due to their seemingly normal, attractive appearance, which contrasted sharply with their gruesome crimes. The case shocked the nation and sparked intense debate about nurture versus nature, the criminal justice system, and the roles of the media in sensationalizing crime. Paul Bernardo was born in Scarborough, Ontario, Canada, on August 27th, 1964, and is the third and youngest child of Kenneth Walter Bernardo and Marilyn Elizabeth Bernardo. Paul Bernardo presented himself as being a happy and well-adjusted kid on the outside, was an active Boy Scout, and had a lot of hobbies otherwise. However, his home life was anything but happy and well-adjusted. Kenneth Bernardo was an alcoholic. He was controlling and physically and verbally abusive towards Marilyn and the children, with accounts dating back to just before the birth of their son David in 1961. But she would stay with him out of love and in the hopes that things were going to improve, which they didn't. She went on to have a second child with Kenneth in 1962, their daughter Deborah. Despite the abuse, Marilyn would remain married and dedicated to her husband, and would tell her friends that she was thankful that her husband loved her enough to marry her. Friends of hers at the time said she wasn't always like this, and her confidence was stunted after she married Kenneth. Marilyn eventually exhausted her dedication as well as her discipline with her marriage. Fed up with being ignored and beaten, she started having an affair with an old boyfriend of hers. She became pregnant, and on the 27th of August, 1964, Marilyn Bernardo gave birth to her third child, Paul Kenneth Bernardo. After the birth of Paul, Marilyn became heavily withdrawn and depressed, in turn neglecting her children, herself, and her home. While on the surface, the outside world would witness a collected and normal family grow before them, internally the home was beyond dysfunction. The abuse was something that the children would witness throughout their childhood as well as endure. And as the marriage became more strained, they started to sleep in separate beds. Marilyn converted the basement into her new bedroom, while Kenneth remained upstairs in the main master bedroom. Sexual abuse was not uncommon either by the hands of Kenneth. Deborah especially was victimized. Kenneth would also sit on the sofa during family movie nights. While Marilyn and the boys watched the film, he would molest his daughter under a blanket. Marilyn would notice this, but ignore it. Deborah would have to draw the curtains when she got dressed because Kenneth would try to look in the windows and masturbate. She would also sleep with empty cans and food wrappers in her bed and strewn around the room, so that if he tried to get into her room at night, she would hear him and wake up. After a fight between his parents in 1981, Bernardo, at 16 years old, was informed by his mother that he was the result of an extramarital affair, and that Kenneth was not his biological father. Bernardo was repulsed by this, and began to call his mother a whore and slut. She reciprocated by calling him a bastard from hell, which was one of many insulting names he would be called from that point forward. She began to outwardly reject him, and in return, he did the same, referring to her as it to his friends and others he would speak to. The children would go without meals, clean clothes, and Paul Bernardo was bullied for his odor at school because his clothes were not washed regularly, and his home itself was filthy. This had an effect on Bernardo's confidence, and he became quite isolated. He didn't spend as much time as the average child would developing social skills or meaningful connections with his peers. He would eventually grow into his inner perversions and dark fantasies as well, and an obsession with fire, or pyromania. From a dysfunctional family to dysfunctional relationships, Bernardo's first romantic interactions were also filled with abuse. His domineering behavior drove his first girlfriend to leave him for one of his friends. In retaliation, Bernardo set fire to all of her belongings in which he had access to. He was, however, relatively well liked by girls, and was good at maintaining grades and his appearance. Nothing in his public life would suggest that he had come from a broken home at this time. However, just like always, the outside doesn't reflect the inside with this one. Bernardo had been amassing a collection of pornographic images since around the age of 10. As he got older, these images were not enough to satisfy him, and he desired more realistic depictions of women. And just like his father, his neighbors caught him on a few occasions peeping through women's windows, one even commenting, "Like father, like son," after reporting him to the police. In 1982, Bernardo attended the University of Toronto Scarborough, or UTSC, studying accounting, and worked his day job for a multi-level marketing scheme called Amway, which deeply affected him psychologically as he fell victim to the company. At university, Bernardo and his college friends practiced pickup lines on women they met at bars and were fairly successful. Bernardo was into humiliating his dates in public and violent sex, including aggressive anal intercourse. His relationships became increasingly violent and unstable, as he threatened to kill his partners if they disclosed the abuse. And in 1986, Bernardo was served with restraining orders by 2 women after he made violent and obscene phone calls to them. And by May of 1987, Bernardo would begin a spree of rapes that would cement him in media as the Scarborough Rapist. In the early hours of the morning of May 4th, 1987, a 21-year-old woman getting off the bus was grabbed and brutally raped in front of her parents' home. Over the next week alone, there would be 2 more similar assaults, including a 19-year-old who was assaulted in her parents' backyard. The women were all between the ages of 15 and 21, and the attacks included beatings, intense verbal abuse, and dire threats to discourage the victims from going to the police or family. This led authorities to conclude that they all had been perpetrated by the same man. And by December 16th, Bernardo had carried out 5 sexual assaults, and the media dubbed him the Scarborough Rapist. The Toronto Police Service issued a warning to women in Scarborough traveling alone at night, especially those riding buses. Bernardo's ego grew as he got away with being a serial rapist and fulfilling some of his darkest fantasies, and even more so as he began a recent relationship with his submissive accomplice, Carla Homolka. Homolka and Bernardo met on October 17, 1987, at the Howard Johnson Hotel. A then 23-year-old Paul and his friend Van met Carla, 17 years old, and her friend Debbie at a bar in the hotel while they were attending a veterinary conference. The same night, Carla and Paul had sex. They then exchanged numbers and arranged to meet up again. By December of 1989, they were engaged, and Bernardo was actively cheating on Homolka at the time, and still stalking and assaulting young girls and women. She was not aware of this at the time. However, Homolka would eventually join in with Bernardo's crimes, seemingly in an attempt to keep him interested in her. This began when she became extremely jealous of the attention that he was giving to her then 12-year-old sister Tammy. at one point spotting him peeping through Tammy's bedroom window as she was getting changed. On a number of occasions, Paul Bernardo's name was brought up to the police in relation to physically and sexually aggressive behaviors from him. He was also a good fit for the composite sketches released at the time of the suspected Scarborough Rapist. Despite this, he still went undetected for nearly 4 years, something that over time would seem to increase his confidence when committing the crimes, making him more brazen and sadistic. Near the end of his spree, he was kidnapping openly in broad daylight. On 2 occasions, Bernardo was reported to local law enforcement by those who knew him personally after they saw the uncanny resemblance to the composite sketch released in the media. One of those people being his closest friend, Van. On the first occasion he had reported their concerns to police, they interviewed him and took samples of DNA, and Bernardo was released with no further action taken. The second time being a few years later by Van once again, who no longer could deny that Bernardo seemed to fit the sketch, and he reported him to the police again, and no arrest was made. Bernardo's inflated ego and enabling from Homolka would make him go undetected and continue hunting for victims. Bernardo has held fantasies of rape and violence since his early teens, including creating a virgin farm where he would breed virgins to rape. Then, Bernardo discovered that unlike other girls he had dated, Carla Homolka shared the same sick fantasies as he did. By 1990, Bernardo had lost his job as an accountant and began smuggling cigarettes across the nearby Canada-United States border. He spent long periods of time with Homolka's family, who liked him and were unaware of his criminal acts, including the ones happening in their own home. Bernardo would escalate from peering into Tammy's window to entering her room to masturbate while she slept. Carla helped Bernardo by breaking into the windows in her sister's room, allowing him free access. One evening, Carla laced spaghetti sauce with crushed Valium, and she served it to her sister, who soon lost consciousness. Bernardo then attempted to rape Tammy while Carla watched, but after about a minute, she regained consciousness. Later in 1991, Carla stole the anesthetic agent halothane from a veterinary clinic she worked at. And on the evening of December 23rd, Carla and Bernardo laced an eggnog rum cocktail and gave it to Tammy. When Tammy lost consciousness, Carla and Bernardo undressed her, and then Carla applied a halothane-soaked cloth to her sister's nose and mouth. Carla wanted to, quote, give Tammy's virginity to Bernardo for Christmas. According to her, Bernardo was disappointed that he was unable to take her virginity. And while Tammy's parents slept upstairs, the two recorded themselves raping Tammy in the basement. And at some point during this, Tammy began to profusely vomit and choke, and then she stopped breathing. They tried to revive her and call 911 after hiding the evidence, dressing Tammy and moving her into her bedroom. A few hours later, Tammy was pronounced dead at St. Catherine's General Hospital. She never regained consciousness. This would be their first kill, making Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka the Ken and Barbie killers, and thus began their hunt for more victims. Shortly after Tammy was confirmed dead, Bernardo and Carla videotaped themselves having sex, where Carla was wearing Tammy's clothes and role-playing as her. They then moved out of the Homolka house to rent a bungalow in Port Dalhousie to allow Carla's parents to grieve, and to bring less risk to their future crimes. Their next murder would be that of a Jane Doe, a 15-year-old girl whose identity has been protected. Carla had groomed this child since she was 12 years old via frequent visits to the pet shop that Carla worked at. And on June 7th of 1991, Carla invited this 15-year-old girl to their home. She was then drugged, and then both Homolka and Bernardo sexually assaulted her and videotaped the whole ordeal. The girl survived, and it's unclear what she did afterwards, as this incident didn't seem to be reported. And then in August, Jane Doe was invited back to the couple's residence once again and was drugged. Homolka called 911 for help after the girl vomited and stopped breathing while being raped. The ambulance did not arrive, however, as Bernardo and Homolka resuscitated the girl and recalled the ambulance. This incident in particular is actually one of the first and only incidences where a snuff film was actually almost created. By true definition, a snuff film is a creation involving rape and then the inevitable murder of the victim on camera. Now the catch is, this doesn't actually have to be sold or anything of that nature. It's supposed to be a trophy. And that's exactly what this would have been, but the victim did not die on camera. In the early morning hours of June 15th, 1991, while driving through Burlington to steal license plates, Bernardo came across 14-year-old Leslie Mahaffy. Leslie had been locked out of her house for missing curfew after attending a friend's wake. Bernardo then opened his car door and approached Leslie, telling her that he wanted to break into a neighbor's house. Oddly enough, she was unfazed and asked if he had any cigarettes. When Bernardo led her to his car, he shoved her in and blindfolded her, and drove her to Port Dalhousie. He then let Carla know that they had a victim. Bernardo and Carla videotaped themselves torturing and raping Leslie while pop music blared in the background. And at one point, Bernardo said, "You're doing a good job, Leslie, a damn good job. The next 2 hours are going to determine what I do to you right now. And you're scoring perfect." Leslie then cries out in pain and begs Bernardo to stop as she's sodomized by him. During the assault, Leslie told Bernardo that her blindfold was slipping. The possibility that she could identify her attackers if she had lived dawned on Bernardo, and so the following day, Carla gave her a lethal dose of Halcyon. Bernardo then strangled her, and after the murder, they drugged the body into the basement, and the next day attended a family dinner at the Homolkas while the corpse would lie in their basement floor. Bernardo and Carla decided to dismember the body and encase each part of her remains in concrete. Bernardo bought a dozen bags of cement at a hardware store the following day, for some reason keeping the receipts, which would be damning evidence at his trial. Bernardo then cut a part of the body using his grandfather's circular saw. The two then would make a number of trips to dump the cement blocks in Lake Gibson, which was 11 miles south of Port Dalhousie. Up until this point, Bernardo had committed over 20 rapes, some with Homolka, and possibly multiple other murders that have not been confirmed. The final hunt of the Ken and Barbie killers would begin on April 16th of 1992, shortly after school let out. Bernardo and Homolka were driving to look for potential victims. The streets were generally empty as they passed Holy Cross Secondary School. The killers spotted 15-year-old Kristen French walking home. After they had pulled into a parking lot nearby Grace Lutheran Church, Homolka got out of the car carrying a map, pretending to be in need of assistance. When French looked at the map, Bernardo struck her from behind and then shoved her into the front seat of the car at knife point. From the back seat, Homolka subdued Kristen by pulling her hair and shoving her head down. And as time passed, her parents reported her missing to police. The Barbie killers would then torture and rape Kristen repeatedly over Easter weekend. She was forced to drink excessive amounts of alcohol and submit to Bernardo's violent sexual fantasies. She was never blindfolded, which meant she could visually identify Bernardo and Homolka. To Bernardo, this sealed his intentions to kill her no matter what, as he had no intentions of getting caught, let alone stopping the couple's disgusting spree. The following morning, they decided to kill Kristen. Bernardo strangled her for 7 minutes while Homolka watched. And at one point, Kristen struggled and managed to try to escape. This is when Carla Homolka beat her with a rubber mallet. Then, Kristen was strangled with a noose around her neck, which was secured to a chest. As she turned blue and began to die, Homolka went to clean up and fix her hair. Later, Kristen's body would be cleaned and her hair would be cut off before her body was dumped in a ditch in Burlington. It was found on April 30th of 1992. And amidst all of this, there were multiple times that Bernardo, as well as Homolka, were interviewed by authorities and investigated for the Scarborough Rapist case. Eventually, things grew to connect those incidences with the murders, and in December of 1992, the Center of Forensic Sciences finally began testing the DNA samples taken for Bernardo 2 years earlier. On the 27th of that month, Bernardo beat Homolka with a flashlight, leaving multiple bruises. Claiming that she had been in a car accident, Homolka returned to work on the 4th of January of 93. Her skeptical co-workers called her parents, and although they rescued her the following day by physically removing her from Bernardo's house, Homolka went back in to frantically search for something. Her parents took her to St. Catherine's General Hospital, where she gave a statement to the NRP that she was a battered spouse and filed charges against Bernardo. He was subsequently arrested and later released on his own recognizance. A total of 2 years after Bernardo's DNA sample was obtained, Toronto police were informed that it matched that of the Scarborough Rapist and immediately placed Bernardo under 24-hour surveillance. Metro Toronto Sexual Assault Squad investigators interviewed Homolka on February 9th of 93. In this interview, she focused on his abuse of herself. Later that night, she told her aunt and uncle that Bernardo was the Scarborough Rapist, and that they were responsible for the rape and murder of Leslie Mahaffy and Kristen French, and that they had recorded everything on videotape. The NRP subsequently opened its investigation on Tammy Homolka's death again, and 2 days later, Carla Homolka met with Niagara Falls lawyer George Walker, who sought legal immunity from Crown Prosecutor Houlihan in exchange for her cooperation. She was also placed under 24-hour surveillance. The couple made arrangements to file and legally change their names, which was approved on February 13th, 93. On February 17th, detectives finally arrested Bernardo on several charges and obtained a search warrant. Because the connection to the murders was weak, the warrant was limited. No evidence which was not expected and documented in the warrant could be removed from his property, and all videotapes found by police had to be viewed in the house. Damage had to be kept to a minimum. Police could not tear down walls looking for tapes. The search of the house lasted 71 total days, and the only tape found by police had a brief segment of Homolka performing oral sex on the Jane Doe. During a call from jail, Bernardo told his lawyer, Ken Murray, that the rape videos were hidden in a ceiling light fixture in the upstairs bathroom. Murray found the tapes and hid them from investigators. After Murray resigned as Bernardo's lawyer, his new attorney, John Rosen, willingly turned the tapes over to police. The government would end up offering Homolka a plea bargain of 12 years imprisonment, which she had 1 week to accept, and if she declined, they would charge her with 2 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of second-degree murder, and other crimes. She accepted the offer, and on May 14th, Homolka's plea bargain was finalized, and she began giving statements to police investigators about her crimes with Bernardo. She told police that Bernardo often bragged that he had raped as many as 30 women, twice as many as the police expected. There has also been suspicion of unconfirmed victims that have never been found or identified as well. Bernardo was tried for the murders of Kristen French and Leslie Mahaffy in 1995, and his trial included detailed testimony from Carla Homolka and the videotapes of the rapes. Bernardo testified that the deaths were accidental, later claiming that Homolka was the actual killer. Bernardo was convicted of a number of charges, including 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 sexual aggravated assaults, and sentenced to life in prison without parole for at least 25 years. He was designated a dangerous offender, so that makes it highly unlikely that he'll ever be released. Carla Homolka, however, was released in 2005, and has since remarried and had children, and changed her name multiple times.